All righty, boys and girls, welcome back to another episode of the Red, White, Claret, and Blue Show with your hosts, Alex, and the man who, much like the flag of his ancestry of Poland, is either white or red at all times. It is Christopher Condit, your American villain voices, and as always, the lukewarmiest of lukewarm opinions. Chris, you're back after quite a time away in the Grand Caymans, leaving me alone to just be miserable. I will never forget you for that. Forgive you for that. We'll never forget or forgive. How are you doing, sir? How was the trip? The people are wondering. How are you doing?
I'm great. The trip was amazing. It was sort of once in a lifetime. I've said that like about the last 3 trips I've taken, but it was sort of a once in a lifetime experience. And the weather was obviously beautiful. We swam with stingrays. We stayed at a really nice resort. And Bridge, I think the biggest surprise to me was that my wife, Bridge, absolutely crushed it with all of these like work adjacent or work direct people that I work with or with organizations with which I work. So she was like a little social butterfly out there, man, just like making friends all over the beach. And
No personal questions?
What's that?
No personal questions?
No overtly personal questions. Like
Okay.
I don't want to say I'm surprised, but like she was so good at it that I was telling her like, maybe you need to do my job, so I just got to sit there and drink Miami Vices and, make the occasional joke. So it was like the perfect spot for me. I just had to, keep swinging and hitting doubles every now and then. And she took up a ton of people's times just hanging out. And she said, well, the funny part was she says, well, all I really did was like ask them about themselves and get them to talk. And I said to her, what do you think I do every day?
That's sales, baby.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not out there just talking about what I'm selling. I'm asking about them. So, but it was great. I mean, really fun, great food, good, really nice people that we were with. Got to meet a lot of people that I didn't know directly with either the organization that I represent or that we work with. And obviously, if you can get to the Grand Caymans in February, I would recommend doing it. It's quite beautiful.
So, Chris, if I had to make you choose Grand Cayman with your wife or Aston Villa match with me,
that's like choosing, between your kids. But
funny enough, you have one girl child and one male child. So much like me and Bridge, you are once again picking based on genders.
In the interest of staying married, I'm going to say the trip with my wife. Although that I don't know if that upsets our podcast marriage here.
Listen, we're on video. I know that she listens. She does not necessarily watch. So, Bridge, I know what we saw in each other's eyes. I know what the real answer was. Don't check YouTube. Well, speaking of our trip to Villa, Chris, we are here to talk about Villa and the Anwar El Gholzi Derby that happened on Friday afternoon. So let's dive right into it. Villa's tactical setup. No Malen, still sick. Unfortunately, it seems like he's got something pretty serious if it's going to keep him out of 2 match day squads. But still a very, very strong lineup from Villa. Ultimately, Lamar Bogard steps in as left center back. I think it's a testament. I'll pause right there for a second to say it's evidence for how thin we are that Tyrone Mings, who now is being said like will not play, will not feature, was still named to the match day 18 over a youth player because we are just that thin for experience in some of these roles. I'm glad he didn't need to pull a James Chester for us, but again, kind of continuing through, Garcia starts and Ian Matson as well. Saw that rotation coming, especially with Matt Cash seeming to aggravate an injury. And then Asensio central and Bailey wide right. Also interesting that Emi Martinez started after pulling out of the match earlier. You wouldn't think that we would need him, but actually it turns out we did need one of his classic saves early on. Now, before I get to the usual question of what did you think when you saw the lineup, what I do want to pay special attention to is someone who has been, um, yeah, you know what? Let's be honest, criticized on this podcast a lot, and that is young Lamar Bogard. We have certainly called out his inability offensively, how the team has certainly looked weak where he has stepped into it. What I do want to give him credit for is that at his age, he is being asked to do a lot, and
Mhm.
almost like a John McGinn esque from the mid to back line, the way that John
Yeah,
McGinn is throughout the midfield of if there is an open position, Lamar Bogart is going to play it. And I would not
correct.
be surprised if at some point we see him at left back, right center back, defensive mid, a little bit more offensive mid. So kudos to the young player for stepping in, obviously not necessarily into areas where he is the most comfortable, and always at least being willing to try to do a job. And
Yep.
so I do want to applaud him and definitely thank him for that for the team.
Well, it's not easy to do, for him to move into different roles like that, especially given Unai Emery's system and what each player is individually asked to do, and the amount of drilling it takes to get to where they're expected to be. So I do give him a lot of credit for that. I think if you look a little toward the future, it's going to be interesting where he lands, because he looks to me more comfortable as a defensive mid or as a
Oh, I
center
think it's
back
center
than he
back.
does
I
as a center
definitely
back
think it's center
than he
back. Yeah,
does out wide by a far margin, right?
yeah.
But yeah, I think center back is ultimately where he lands. But the ability to pull him forward, like I said, he's had a couple of decent games when he's
Yeah.
played at defensive mid. His worst position is obviously out wide. So the question I think for me going forward is the center backs are often asked to carry the ball quite a bit for Unai Emery, and is he going to be able to make that adjustment as a defensive center back, and be able to carry the ball and pick a pass, because that's where he struggled the most, is finding the right lane to pass.
And that's why I think it will be center back for him, because unless he makes a jump in his offensive ability, which sure he might, um, not needing to play on the half turn and kind of pick out, those long diagonal balls, whether to play through like crowded areas. If he can be center back, he's obviously got the size and the stature for it, I think. And so if he can keep the entire game in front of him, we have seen players like that be successful within Unai Emery's system. You don't necessarily need to be Pau Torres. So
Right.
I think that simplifies the game for him, so to speak, and you can deal with his range of passing. Not even deal. I think his range of passing for a center back is fine. It's when you put him at right back or in the midfield where he needs to have a little bit more variety there, where I think it becomes more of a potential issue.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
my 2 cents. But
Sure.
anyway, um, so any other comments on the rest of the lineup before we dive into the match?
I was a little surprised to see Martinez, I think, like you were, but other than that, I don't. It was sort of what we expected, or what I think I would have expected. I didn't obviously get to do the preview, but I wasn't super surprised, other than Martinez, since he had pulled out previously.
Yeah, I mean, I would have loved to not have Ollie Watkins in there. I would have loved to not have Yuri Tielemans in there. I think the two of them in particular, like, really could use a break, with the amount of miles and the lack of options behind them to do what they do. But that's the world in which we live right now.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we saw as we kind of move into the match that despite playing a team at the bottom of the championship, Villa really need all their players firing at this point because that was for a lot of the match tough going. A lot of possessional dominance, but not a lot of inventiveness, uh quality in the final third, just very little end product. So, despite the win, I don't think we necessarily need to go like minute by minute on this because we're
Yeah.
not playing Cardiff again. Like the team is going to be different, all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
But what did you see that went wrong, Chris, and why Villa weren't able to just roll out to? Because again, Cardiff weren't even playing their starters; like they rotated as well, given where they're at in the table. So
'Cause
you're
they need
playing a
wins. Yeah, they need wins
bottom
in the
table
table.
championship
Yeah.
side's bench
Yep.
and couldn't necessarily carve through. What did you notice while you were watching?
A couple of things stood out. The biggest to me was that in possession, we saw a lot of just the same sort of thing we've seen where it gets bogged down and it's a slow moving pass around the back, or pass between two players around the back, and nothing is really getting created. And Cardiff put everybody behind the ball, so
Sure.
it's a low block like we've struggled to break down for the last two seasons. You would still expect that with the level of players that Villa have, that they would be able to just 1v1 beat most of these guys. You know, like Marcus Rashford, Leon Bailey, Asensio, Morgan Rogers, like these players beat 1v1. Although Rogers didn't come on until the 80th minute, so I apologize for saying that. But still, like you're good enough to just go at somebody and beat him. That I think is the frustrating thing. But more to the point, we need to see more quick moving, cycling of the ball to keep that block moving back and forth across the pitch, because otherwise they'll just settle in and wait. I mean, what do they need to do? You know, if they can play this thing out and get one on the counter or get a penalty, which we can talk about later, then you've got a whole new ball game, right? And I had the pleasure of watching it with my father-in-law, Big Walter, and
Shout out Big Walt.
he's a relatively new soccer fan, but I was telling him, I said, look, man, the longer this thing sits at 0-0, the more they're going to feel it in the stands, the more you're going to start to hear that low murmur kind of going through the ground, and the more the players are going to feel pressure, and then the more you're prone to a mistake. So I was getting concerned at the lack of end product. And then the one thing I will say is when a chance was created, and the one that's sticking out in my mind specifically was Marcus Rashford. Like, you create that beautiful chance and he skies it 30 yards or 30 rows deep instead of just being able to tap it in. And you would expect a player like him to finish that pretty much every time. That was about as close to a sitter as you're going to get. So even when you created a chance, your players couldn't finish. Now, in the second half, things moved a little better, but that for the first half, it was a slog, real slog.
Yeah, I thought Cardiff did really well in their defensive formation and their compactness and intelligence. So we've talked about how a lot of Villa's best opportunities are created when we can get 2-on-1s or overloads on the wings, right? Particularly on the left-hand side between some interplay of like, now I guess it would be like Rashford, Dean, and Rogers or something like that. But we've seen it with JJ and Matson and all that kind of stuff. And so Cardiff lining up in the 5-4-1 that they were essentially defending in for a large portion of this match keeps those extra guys wide, right? You've got those extra ones in the back line that don't necessarily need to worry as much about the space behind them because they've got that extra cover from the center backs. And to your point, when Villa are just moving it slowly from point to point to point to point, like around the midfielder, around the back line, nothing there needs to shift or move or anything like that. So what I would have liked to see is when it got to the middle to a Yori or a McGinn, play those little testing balls where you play it into Rogers or Ali or Asensio in the center. And even if it's just like right back to them, right? Play it into Rogers, he taps it immediately back to the midfielder. The defense at least needs to think about that. And they move inwards, they compress a little bit. And that gives you that extra little bit of space that if you can quickly cycle it back to the other side, now you're running. Now you're running at the defense. Now you're creating some of those overloads. But to your point, when you just follow the teacup around, the defense doesn't need to move, doesn't need to change anything. So I think you're right in the slow buildup. And it was good to see in the second half that all of a sudden now we were pinging some long balls across. You saw McGinn on the left side of the midfield, ping it to Leon Bailey on the right, and vice versa. Yori going all the way out to Rashford on the left. And now the defense needed to move a little quicker, and that's ultimately how we created some more opportunities. But I don't know why it takes this team 45 minutes to figure that out.
Right.
Why it takes a manager like Unai Emery 45 minutes to figure that out, to then get into half to make those adjustments. Because again, these are all first team guys. These are supposed to be are Champions League capable squad, and you're telling me that they're not intelligent enough players to realize that like this slow just pass around buildup isn't working. Uh, I talked in the pre-match about how Villa have not had a signature win in a long time. At least
Mhm.
at the beginning of the year, when we would play the lower tier championship sides, when we played like a Bologna, like we stomped them. You know, we went out and we put in a performance. I don't think even Friday you can necessarily say that Villa went and put out a performance to advance in the cup here.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I I mean, I'm glad we got the win, right? Because now we're in the quarterfinal, and we've talked about it's a proper cup run now and all those things. Even though Unai Emery will tell everybody that we're not going to win it, we're not the favorites to win it, blah 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 blah. But I will take the win. But it was much more difficult than I expected it to be, given the level of competition that we had.
So the other thing that I want to talk about, Chris, is Leon Bailey and Garcia, incredibly ineffective on the right-hand side. What did you see or not see out of the two of them? Are you just giving credit to the Cardiff left back, or is this something else?
I I can do both, I think, and you do have to credit the again. I think it boils down to more than individual play, defensive organization, but I don't know what it is about Leon Bailey right now, and this season by and large, because he for the bulk of the season has been very ineffective in attack, and I don't see the player that we're accustomed to seeing, who is confident on the ball, dribbling at defenders and beating them and picking out crosses, or dribbling to the byline and for a cutback and a tap in. We haven't seen that at almost at all this season, and it continued against Cardiff, and I'm not sure why, other than like you pointed out. I mean, their defensive organization was great. It was very good. But my larger point is, if Leon Bailey or anybody else for that matter cannot take a guy 1v1 who's in the championship at the bottom, potentially a backup. I don't know Cardiff's lineup well enough to know how often everybody
Sure.
plays.
Yeah.
Like, if you can't just beat him on occasion and make someone else do something, then we are in big trouble, because I need you to do that in the Champions League, not just in the FA Cup. So I need the player that is willing to take on anybody. I need Unai Emery to find that player inside of Leon Bailey and bring him back.
Yeah, I last year we were talking about him as one of the best wingers in the league, potentially
Mhm.
the world, with how infallible he looked. And I was a defender of Leon Bailey before last season. I thought he didn't get credit for some of the stuff that he created. And we talked earlier this year about how we felt like he wasn't necessarily getting uh, a fair shake, that he was creating more opportunities that, due to the inability of other players in the team to be in the right areas, or like an Ollie Watkins to finish it or something like that, that he was getting unfairly criticized for lack of product when it should have been there. The team
Yeah.
last year kind of finishes those opportunities. But I think we've seen for a couple months now, and
Yeah.
particularly yesterday, like this is not the same player. And what I see is a player that has started to really press a little too much. Um, there were countless opportunities on Friday where I thought he had the opportunity to put in a cross or to play a pass and didn't. I think because he's trying to create too much, either for himself or for others, find the perfect last pass or free himself up for a shot when it's easier to lay it off. And you see moments throughout the whole year. We've seen moments. The pass that he had in for Ollie Watkins on I forget the minute, but he kind of played it through. Ollie had a heavy touch, played across. No one really got it. It was very
Mhm.
early in the game. Like, you see the ability there. It's just not consistent enough. And I think as the match goes on and things get more difficult, he winds up pushing. I almost feel like at this point it's not going to come this season. Just like I think that all of a sudden the floodgates are not going to open up for Ollie Watkins to learn how to finish over the course of the last 9 games. I don't think that all of a sudden Leon Bailey is going to figure it out. I don't think that Unai Emery is going to figure it out. I think this is one of those that if both of those players are here next year, that's something that Unai is going to need to work with them on over the summer, get, a clear head, and just start fresh in August, September next year.
Yeah, I agree. You got to do something here, because this, it's just we can't have this many players misfiring this often. And I mean, you see the result, right? It's a slog against Cardiff. We're mid-table in the Prem. We're still doing well in Champions League, but we need to have everybody firing at once. And at this point, we're running out of time. Running out of time in a big way.
Well, we'll get to Champions League later. Let's still focus on the championship club that we were playing. And
I go everywhere.
See how I brought us back, though. That's teamwork. That's how this works. Yep. So the other thing is that Cardiff certainly had chances. There was Ian Maatsen on our beloved Anwar El Ghazi. Thankfully, he was offsides, didn't necessarily need to go to anything. But 41st minute, that to me is a Stonewall penalty. I don't know why the ref didn't call it. He was in good position. And I don't know why VAR didn't step in to bring that back. That to me should have been 1-0 to Cardiff going into half.
Not even close. Well, to give it 1-0 is saying a lot. We still have Emi Martinez back there. The best penalty keeper in the world. But still, no, I don't have any idea. That was a penalty. It looked like a penalty in real time to me. It looked like even more of a penalty on replay. So we dodged a bullet. And once again, it proves the point that it's not actually anti-Villa. It's just incompetence. So everybody who thinks that it's anti-Villa, what happened there then? Because that was an absolute gift. And anyone, if you think that wasn't a penalty, please DM us. Slide tackle into Alex's DMs.
There he goes.
because if you think that's not a penalty, I need to hear from you, because it was clear as day. That was a pen, and we got away with one. 100%.
Yep. So as I just said, potentially 1-0 to Cardiff at that point. Villa still haven't scored, and in the 65th minute, great opportunity for Cardiff. They get it wide, win against Ian Maatsen again. Early cross in, center forward, I forget, Salak, I think, makes a great run in front of Konsa, holds him off, first time finish, and puts it right where you want to, on the ground, right next to Emi's left foot, so that he really needs to kind of get down quickly with his hand to get it. And thankfully he does. Now we have been higher on Robin Olsen than others. That doesn't necessarily mean that we are high on Robin Olsen. I think if that's Robin Olsen, all of a sudden we're at 2-0 Cardiff and Villa are really under it.
Yes. I think you are absolutely right. And, credit Emi for making that great save. Also, do want to point out they didn't score on their first shot on target. So small victory.
Yay, Villa. Bottom table championship backups. That's who we keep out. Clean
Hang
sheets.
The banner.
No
Hang
first
the
shot
banner.
On target. All right, so we've been pretty negative for a while, I think justifiably so. But let's talk about the good of Villa. Marco Asensio is a goal machine right now, apparently. It doesn't really matter how it happens or how scruffy it is, but hey, we'll take it right now.
Yes, 100%. So at least he's got the M product right now, and he is scoring in bunches, which right now we desperately need in every competition. So hopefully long may that continue, right? And he has looked brighter each time he's been out on the pitch to me, and seems to be getting comfortable with the play of Rashford in particular. I mean, that connection seems to be there. It's a Rashford assist and an Asensio goal right now. So I like that, and I would try and get those two on the pitch together as often as possible.
Yeah, it seems to work. Rashford seems to know where he's going to be, and he seems to know the positions that he needs to pick up. I'll say Rashford also looked pretty decent yesterday. His corners are still god-awful, and I don't know how he can play such a nice dead
He
ball
had
free
one
kick.
very good one.
What one
I
out of
can't
how
remember. I
many?
can't remember what it was, but he had one very good corner that should have been. It was like the perfect height to land right in front of, like to get right
Yeah.
in front of the keeper, but not too close. But it was. So I want to stop. He had one really good corner. It didn't get finished, but it was a really good one. So anyway,
Okay.
yeah,
Fair enough.
yeah.
And then he played in some really dangerous crosses and some good balls. Actually, it's funny because the assist was his worst one. He kind of like scuffed it off his calf, I think, and Asensio
Mhm.
just needed to be there. But again, getting into dangerous areas, I'm always going to have concerns about his defensive application. But in a game like yesterday, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And you really see the quality that he brings in the final third and the fact that he will create. Anything else on the positive side that you want to talk about?
Win's a win. That's it. A win's a win's a win, and we move on.
So you say that wins a win. Right now, I believe Manchester United and Fulham are still going on. Fulham is leading 1-0 in the 59th minute. So let's assume Fulham advances because United are trash. Who who are you hoping for other than the obvious Preston
Oh, I was
in
gonna say,
the draw later today?
yeah, Preston would be the obvious one that I that I wanted to pick. I Other than that, I mean, I I think that everybody left is going to be a relatively difficult out for Villa. So I don't know. I'm maybe Brighton. Like we usually do pretty well against them. I think that could be one that's a decent matchup. The other one that maybe you think about is Bournemouth, but other than that, I want Preston, but it's going to be City that draw them at home because they just get nothing but lower tier clubs until the semifinals. That's just been their luck. But so I think out of everyone that's not Preston, I think probably Brighton seems the most likely for me that I would want to pick.
Yeah, I think that's a good shout. I mean, the thing is, at this point in the season, and with how Villa have been playing both home and away, there's no one that I feel confident, like without a doubt, that Villa would beat. Even teams that, I mean, they're all out by this point, but even teams in the relegation zone, like I just don't know. Um, but the benefit is, at least if we're at home, we have been tying a lot of games at home. And so then we go into penalty kicks, and as you said, we've got Emi Martinez, the best penalty kick keeper in the world, so that always gives us a shot.
Mm-hmm.
Newcastle go out, so there is now another team, big team down, one of the more successful ones, and so this does, I think, continue to be, even if we're not the favorite or even amongst the favorites, probably our best route into Europe again for next year. And so it certainly has become my top priority for the rest of the season.
Like we've talked about for the last couple of weeks. Yes, I agree. Mm-hmm.
And so from one cup to another, let's talk about the Champions League because we are out of the Club and we are into the cup phase of it. And let's preview our upcoming match against Bruges. So we are away in Belgium Tuesday, 12:45 Eastern time. Obviously, we are on our revenge game tour. So let's a little reminder of last time. And I guess I'll say at the outset, we will probably cut up our preview of Bruges from the last Champions League match and re-release that on our socials because a lot of it is still applicable. So we're not going to dive super deep today on the tactics side of things, more so just what they've been up to since we played them last, and group, and you can see a little bit more in depth of what we think of Club Brugge. But revenge game 1-0 in Belgium, really categorized by the Mingsiest of Mings mistakes that I think I have ever seen. You will remember he picked up the goal kick, led to a PK that was ultimately buried. But honestly, 1-0 and losing due to a mistake like that almost feels like it flatters Villa in that game. The other commentary that came out of it was that that was arguably our worst performance, at least of the season, under Unai Emery. They just had nothing. 57% possession with only one shot on target. Were hardly a threat, barely able to play through the lines. And I think despite the 1-0 score line, Bruges really dominated us over the course of those 90 minutes. Fair,
Yeah,
Chris?
I mean, yes, I agree. That, like, I remember doing that post match reaction pod, and at the time it was our worst performance under Emery this season. I think that's not the case anymore, but it's still one of our worst performances in terms of just inability to create any kind of threat. It was awful, and you hope for not the same repeat with the new boys in. Hopefully they can create a little more up front. But even taking away Tyrone Mings's mistake, which is, like, going back and watching that replay is hilarious, even though it wasn't at the time, it was catastrophic. But it is the Mingsiest mistake he's ever made. But take that out, forget about it, because it didn't matter. It didn't matter what happened, because Villa could not create a thing, and never really looked a threat. And it was by and large down to kind of what we talked about from the first half of the Cardiff game in the FA Cup, where it was just slow moving, passing the ball around the back, passing the ball through the middle with nothing on the end. So the focus and question should be, how do we avoid that this time around? Because Bruges will look at that game and say, defensively, and even to an extent in attack, we did exactly what we wanted to accomplish in that game. And if we play like that again, we're either 0-0 or 1-0 going back to Villa Park for the second leg, and that's a good spot to be for them. So I think Villa need to come out aggressive and attack early. Don't let Bruges settle in. Move the ball quickly. Use the speed that we have, and create opportunities much more quickly than we saw in the first in the Clip phase.
Yeah. So what has Bruges been up to since then? They finished 24th in the Clip, last team to qualify. And after they played Villa, they drew Celtic away. They were able to beat Sporting 2-1 at home, drew Juve 0-0 at home, lost away to City 3-1, and then all of a sudden had the goal explosion against Atalanta, winning 5-2 on aggregate over the two legs, won both of them 2-1 and 3-1. We obviously saw that hilarious end for the Atalanta keeper trying to throw a ball and falling over himself. And then in the Belgian league, they are second, 9 points off of Genk, who's top. They are good at home. They are 9-3-2 at home in the league, only 6-5-3 away. And they are on a slightly worse run of form of late. They went unbeaten with only 5 draws between October 27th to January 25th. They won a lot of those games. More recently, over their last 9, they are 3-3-3, but they've kind of arrested the fall. They've got 3 wins in their last 6. So tactics approach, they're going to create chances. They like playing possession football, and they can finish those chances, as we saw in that 5-2 against Atalanta, as we saw against Villa earlier this year. And just evidence of kind of how much they control the ball and try and impose their will, particularly at home. Only about 25% of the time is their play in their own third. So they really like to get forward quickly, get into that middle attacking third, and then keep it there with their possession. So that is certainly one of the lower percentages that I've seen. Only teams like a City in their heyday, Liverpool, would ever get down into the teens. So that 25 is pretty good. And they create those opportunities with a lot of short passing through the middle. Again, an area where Villa has traditionally been weak before they kind of get it outside. I would anticipate, much like teams in the recent past, they're going to try and attack that left back, left center back side, because there's been a lot of teams that have seemed to try and get some joy over there. And then the other thing to just keep an eye out for is that they have a real balanced attack in terms of how they create their opportunities. So they have 3 different players with 8+ goals and 5+ assists, led by penalty scorer Vanaken, who still leads the league, leads for them with 8 goals, 8 assists. So he's the key danger man, but they certainly have different ways around the wings and with their strikers that they can create opportunities. It's not really like there's one guy that we're going to need to keep our eye out for.
And in Champions League specifically, they've been pretty solid in defense. They've not conceded a lot of goals. I think they're at 7 goals that they've given up. So it'll be an interesting matchup in that sense. I don't know how they're going to set up this time around. Like I said, if I were them, I would try and do the same thing they did in the last time. Which if
they imposed their will on us.
That's if Villa's just willing to pass the ball back and forth around the back, I'll let him do it all day. That doesn't affect me at all. So that's why I think from Villa's perspective, coming out and being aggressive early and moving the ball quickly and forcing that defense to shift is going to be the biggest key, because otherwise I'm concerned, especially away from home, how this thing could end up.
Yeah, and to your point, they're not typically super aggressive in the press. They're not going to push super high, and I think that they will. This isn't to say that they're going to like park the bus and try and make this 0-0, but I think that they will be smart defensively. They will find their opportunities to create those turnovers. Again, like enjoying to attack through the middle. I think you target Morgan Rogers, try and turn him over high up the pitch, and then you attack quickly, get Villa back, and then get them to move around and take advantage of some of those players that are playing out of position. A John McGinn, Lamar Bogart, or Disasi if he comes back into that left center back role.
Right.
Garcia on the right back, you get in behind him. I think those are the key areas where they're going to try and poke and prod. But to your point, they're defensively solid. They're good on the ball. And so, from a Villa perspective, what are you expecting? What would you kind of see to try and neutralize that?
In terms of a lineup or tactics or both?
Both.
So I've been
informed the other, doesn't it?
What's that?
One informs the other, doesn't it?
Yeah, I've been going through my lineup for the last, while we've been going through this, I've been getting different ideas, and I'm still not sure how we're going to land, because I'm assuming Konsa's unavailable. I haven't seen anything official on that yet, but I'm assuming he won't be there. And B, we're kind of still running out of players at the back. So for in goal, it's Emi Martinez. I'm going to go Cash, and then I think Disasi as a right center back, and then Mings if he's available, and Luka Dean. But again, I'm going through not knowing who's fully fit or what. If Mings is not available, do you go Bogart as a right center back and Disasi as a left? You're going to have to plug somebody in there if they're available. Is Kamara available? Because he's not been on the most recent injury report, so I'm wondering if he might be fit, but I don't think they're going to throw him out there right away, right? So that becomes McGinn and Tielemans, even though Tielemans has a ton of minutes recently, and he looks a little beat. And then I go Rashford, Rogers, and Daniel Malen if he's over his illness. If he's not, probably Rashford, Asensio, Rogers, and then Watkins up top. I know I threw a ton of different options out there, but I do like the idea of getting Asensio out there because he's been our best finisher of late, and I think we're going to need all the help we can get up top.
So I am going to assume that Matty Cash and Tyrone Mings are not going to be eligible to play. Same thing with Kamara. I do think, though, if Kamara comes back, we're probably more like to see him in the center back role and then Bogard take one of those midfield roles than vice versa. Yeah. Just due to the experience and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But I think what we'll wind up seeing is Emi in goal, Garcia right back, Disasi right center back, Bogard left center back, Dean as the left back, McGinn and Tielemans in the middle. I think you're right that Rashford will start on the left, but I would actually move him to the bench over Asensio. I've been a little more impressed with Asensio's willingness to press and run than I have with Rashford's, and knowing that we are away, that Bruges is going to try to control the ball and possession and create those opportunities. I'm envisioning them just passing and running circles around Rashford, just kind of floating around on that left-hand side. I would rather bring him in the second half to run at a hopefully slightly more tired defense and create some opportunities. So what I'll say is that I would start Rodgers, Asensio, Malen like you did with Ollie Watkins up top. And then know that you're probably bringing Rashford on for Malen and moving Rodgers to the opposite side at some point.
Bringing Rashford on for Watkins and pulling Malen forward,
That's actually another good idea. We've seen that a couple times so far this year. I like that idea. So tactically, I think that we're going to need to be solid defensively, concede a little bit of the ball just to protect those center backs and right backs and how unfamiliar they are. And I think we try and use our pace, craftiness, to create some opportunities with just the 3-4 guys up top kind of on their own, create, isolated 1-on-1s, 2-on-1s, and hopefully that you can, put Ollie Watkins in behind or something and he finishes it. But I almost would approach this more in the vein of get out of there 0-0, 1-0, and then hope that you turn it around at Villa Park, rather than thinking that we're going to go into Belgium and impose our will and, hopefully roll out 1-0, 2-0, 3-1 winners.
Do you know who doesn't feel that way though? Unai
Emery.
Yeah. He's always going to try. So I don't know. With all that said, I don't feel great about this game. In terms of a score, I'm leaning toward a loss, and I think it's going to be 2-1 or 2-0 Bruges. So I'll to land on one, I'll say 2-1 Bruges.
I have 2-0 Bruges. I think that we're kind of at the point now in this run where it's too many fixtures in too short an amount of time. This international break cannot come soon enough. Obviously, we've got Brentford on the weekend before then, but I really think that if we can get out of this 1-0 losers, that feels like a win to me. Candidly, if we can hold it to a 1-0 loss like last time, I think that by the time the next match rolls around, we can turn that around at Villa Park. But Bruges just look good, man. Maybe I'm putting too much stake in the victory over Atalanta, obviously seeing how Serie A has done elsewhere, but Atalanta is a team that I like to watch that looks good. So for them to be dismantled that way, both home and away, surprised me. And so I think that is certainly clouding my judgment and estimation.
Fair. And like I said, they've been tough to break down defensively in the Champions League specifically. So there is that.
Yeah. All right. Well, hopefully we're both wrong. But regardless, I will be back solo for a recap pod and preview of Brentford on Tuesday night. Chris will then be taking solo over the weekend while I head out of town for a wedding. Shout out Sean. And we hopefully after that we'll be back together to bring you guys more of this lovely banter that you have come to know, love, and appreciate from us.
At least this isn't a third vacation for me though. This is work now.
Yeah, Chris needs to go earn some money, so needs to go win top salesman again for next year, because Bridget has gotten used to a certain standard of living that he needs
she has.
to
Very much so.
Well, Chris, this has been fun. Quicker episode today, but obviously not as much to talk about with Cardiff. We'll certainly have more in the coming weeks. And until then, up the Villa.
Up the Villa.
Hi, Mom and Dad.